So my name is Joe, and this is building brand and UI guidelines for immersive media. Just a little bit about me. I'm the Innovation Manager at TAFE New South Wales, based in Armidale. We have a dedicated team building immersive technology for use inside training inside TAFE. So we're actually building VR and AR experiences that are actually going to be built into curriculum for everything from nursing, childcare, construction, hospitality. We've got 1,200 courses and we're looking to roll immersive technology across those courses. I've got 15 years in games and animation. I was the industry manager for Autodesk for 5 years, so I've been around for a long time. And 5 years in immersive technology. So I've actually spent a lot of time in VR, over 500 hours or so. And I'm also a proud founder of 2 failed startups, so I know how to not do it the right way as well. All right, so the TAFE Digital Lab is the team that I fall under. I run the innovation team. Our focus is 3 to 5 years out. We're looking at immersive tech, machine learning and artificial intelligence as our primary focus at the moment. So I've got a team that 100% dedicated to this. They don't have any other job except for looking at what's next in the next 3 to 5 years. We've also got the immersive media team. They're the guys that are our builders. They actually are building our content. They come from industry, they're animators, Unity developers. I'm recruiting at the moment, so if anyone's looking for a job, come and see me. And we've got a learning tech team and a learning analytics team, so they support us. The learning tech guys start to look at how do we actually integrate this into classrooms, and the analytics team are obviously looking at the numbers. All right, so I'm going to talk about the pillars that I believe are important for immersion. The first one is design and branding. It's probably the one that people forget about, especially the branding part. The other one is interaction, so buttons, reticles, all the bits and pieces and the parts, but also the philosophy behind those interactions. Spatial is really important, oral and emotional. So looking at all those 5. All right, so starting with visual. I was at 3M, head of immersive technology before I was at TAFE. Went to 3M and said, do we have a 3D logo? No, and why would we need one? So similarly, I had the same experience at TAFE. Went to TAFE and said, do we have any 3D logos? Do we have anything that's related to 3D that's been approved by the marketing team? And they don't even have a 3D person on their team. So we're starting to work with, and because we're a government organisation, we actually have to get governmental approval. So we're working on what does our brand look like inside VR, inside AR. How deep is the logo? Can you spin it around? Can you put your head through the A? There's a whole bunch of questions we have to ask fundamentally about just the brand of the design of the logo, let alone all the other fundamentals. And part of that is obviously our colour palette. This is a colour palette for TAFE. But the question for mine is it going to work in a virtual environment? So we're starting to do some tests and it's pretty obvious at the moment that that's a bit glaring. And we probably have to adjust tonal aspects of that. And this is a virtual lobby concept that we're building, but the colours are obviously not quite right. So we're going to talk to the marketing team and say, well, how far can we push this colour design and this colour palette along that spectrum that still makes it recognisable as TAFE, but we're able to not over-simulate people's eyes with too much colour or too much content. So that's really important, and that's ongoing discussions. And that's something that you really want to try and emphasise if you are building for a known organisation in particular, so a brand or whatever. So working with those marketing departments, if you're doing an immersive or a game even that's themed around a particular brand, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that marketing team, going to them and getting approvals, because the worst thing you can have is you go 80% through a game and then they go, oh no, all the colours are wrong and that font's wrong and this is wrong and that's wrong. You'll end up having to rebuild a whole bunch of stuff. And the other part of that is every part of the experience is brand. This is Dior's experience for their catwalk experience they did for the Paris Fashion Show. And they actually built a custom bespoke VR headset viewer. And that's really important to sort of have that element that people know that it's the brand that they're actually dealing with. So that's going into that. So moving into interactions. And I'll spend a bit of time on this one because it's a big passion of mine. The big part I talk about at the moment is actually understanding the language of interaction in VR and AR is so super fledgling at the moment. I'll focus mainly on VR, but equally this interaction design sort of equates to AR. So if you look here, you've got a whole bunch of different parameters and areas you have to focus on. Buttons are really important. They've got to be easily accessible, and there's got to be a reason to push one. I really love the stuff that the guys at Job Simulator do with their 2-key keyboard, if anyone's played that game. It's fantastic. They obviously realised you couldn't type on a keyboard in VR, so they created a keyboard with 2 keys. But other things, obviously, there's the opportunity to think about things not in a 2D context. I hate seeing flat pop-up drop-downs in VR in particular. AR is a little bit more of a challenge because you're still dealing with a phone at the moment. But definitely in AR, like VR, sorry, think about the space you've got. I mean, there's some really good examples with the menus there that go beyond that 2D paradigm. You know, it's really poor design and just lazy designing to actually just drop in a drop-down or drop in a standard 2D menu system. And then talking about controllers, making the decision on when you move from hands to actual controllers. So, and I find this with induction, if you're getting someone in a VR the first time, you don't want to serve hands straight away because they want to see the controllers that they're not quite across yet. They want to understand where those buttons are sitting, and then you can transform into hands later on once they've got their head around it. But it's really important to have an understanding of when to use what type of input device visually inside the headset. And lastly, things like tools are really important as well. This is a welding experience that I built when I was at 3M, and we knew that, you know, it's much more important to see the tool than it is necessary to see hands. So we actually just used the angle grinder as the controller. And the last one is affordances. Probably the most important thing and least understood inside the interaction design. If you put a handle inside a virtual experience, someone's going to try and pull it, or they're going to try and open a door or whatever. Make sure they can, otherwise they'll think it's broken. They'll sit there for 20 minutes trying to actually do it. Equally, things like if you've got a fry pan, people expect to be able to place it on that object, be able to flip up food, things like that. And the most dangerous thing from an affordance is putting a table in an experience that people think they can lean on. So you've actually got to make sure people are aware that those things aren't existing, because a lot of, especially newbies, will try and actually do that. Now, the number of people I've seen hurt, everyone laughs at the videos, but it's a shocking thing for people to actually sort of fall into this space, and especially when they can't see their eyes, can't see the surroundings, and they'll never use VR again, and they'll say, you know, it's dumb, or I don't like it, or whatever, and that's a real dangerous thing to do. The other part I really found interesting, and this is, if people have played this, it's virtual reality, and it was released for the Oculus Go, is limitations informed design. So this is obviously 3DOF with the Go, so they've got this really beautiful raycast sort of fishing rod mechanic that allows you to, you know, really quickly interact with the environment, not have to move or teleport in space. And if you've got relatively you know, new to the medium people, teleportation's a really scary thing to sort of get your head around, and you can get lost quite quickly. But obviously the limitations of having that 3DOF environment where they can't move much and they've only got this small controller, the designers have thought really closely on how to actually overcome that. The other part I really like, and this is the Star Wars experience, is contextual interfaces. This is to the point of no drop-downs, you know. Don't try and slap things in people's faces, because it doesn't happen in the natural world. I mean, obviously, that's not playing it through again, but I'll play it again. If the menus are wrapped around something, it gives people context and they can understand exactly what they have to do. It doesn't have to be explained as much. You're not giving as many instructions, you're just giving visuals. And then if you are looking at 2D menu systems, you do have depth still to play with. This is from the Climb. So play around with the depth that you do have. So don't just sort of go for the lazy technique of throwing in a 2D menu system. At least allow them to sort of have that a little bit more of that gaze view depth control, and understand you've got that endless palette, so you might as well use it. So this is our induction experience that we're working at with TAFE. We're working with a wide range. I've got 500,000 students at TAFE New South Wales. So there's quite a broad gamut of people's experiences. The average age is, I think, around 33, and it's actually trends towards female. So you've got a lot of people that probably haven't been in VR before. So what we wanted to do was make an environment that was fairly restrictive in space. So this is inside a elevator, like actual elevator itself, and you've got a whole bunch of things you actually have to do to get the elevator doors to open. So we pretty much started thinking in our heads, what are all the touch points and the interaction points that you would do in any experience that we build for TAFE? So snapping objects together, pressing buttons, pulling levers. So we've built that into this space, and the person actually gets guided through the experience to actually sort of learn how to use VR while they're in VR. As opposed to, with the experiences we've built to date, we've had to stand there and go, oh no, press that button, click this, do that. And we want to get away from that. We're moving to a space where these students will be independently in these environments, so they'll have to know how to do this stuff naturally. And we also want to build a consistent language of how we interact with objects in space for VR. So we are looking to roll out 50 applications in the next 12 to 24 months. So we've got a lot of stuff going out there, and we want to make sure that they're consistent and that a student can jump into any TAFE experience and know exactly where they are, how to interact, so they're learning straight away. They're not trying to learn the interface before that. So moving into spatial. As I mentioned, this is a virtual lobby concept that we did fairly early on. Again, you see there's no buttons. These are actually plinths represent courses that a student would reach out and actually interact with. We want to make sure that stuff is pretty natural and that they're not having to press buttons unnecessarily, that they're actually just grabbing objects or doing other things. So for us, it's really important to make sure that they feel comfortable in that environment. The benefits of the lobby, and ease in is really important, and I'll show you an example later on of what not to do, so I've made a few mistakes. But having someone in a grounded environment where the horizon's pretty standard, it assists with orientation, it doesn't sort of scare people off, and they're able to sort of get their VR legs before they jump into more immersive experiences. Consistency is really important. Obviously, for us, we're a large organisation, and we want to make sure that people understand that they're in a TAFE experience straight away, and we're able to deliver that extra brand value through that. And then it gives us a single launch point for multiple experiences. As I said, we're launching about 50 experiences in the next 2 years, so we've got a lot of work to do. But we want to make sure that people feel that they know it's a TAFE experience, and they can jump in and out of experiences in the central lobby. So LOCOMOTION's another one. This is a really great game. If anyone's played it, the fact that you actually, sprint vector, if you don't know, using your arms to locomote as opposed to your legs is a really interesting mechanic. And people think that it's actually quite hard to get your head around doing that, but you find that it's pretty natural and it comes to people quite quickly. So we're starting to experiment with different ways of actually using locomotion that may be a bit more simple. The other area we have to consider is we've got about 11% of our students which are disabled. So we actually have to look at, if they're in a wheelchair or if they've got other impairments, of how we actually allow them to still be inside a virtual environment too. And then contextual navigation, again, I'm very anti-menu. So if you can, this is the climb, so if you can actually show what the next task is or the next step is in a particular process, actually having it inside the environment is the best way to do it. So instead of having like next step is X or Y, allowing it to actually be built into the cliff face, for this example, is really quite powerful. And we're starting to look at, this is a theodolite experience that we built for our construction students. We're looking at the spatial mapping of all these things. This is really simple analytics of where people are looking, and the blue one is where the controller is. But for us, it's making sure we understand, is this breaking straight away? We're about to roll out a much more sophisticated analytics platform that will allow us to inform what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, because we want to make sure we're iterating on these experiences. They shouldn't be baked in stone. 3D is not an oil painting. It should always grow and change, as most people should know. But yeah, it's really important for us to get that real-time feedback as people are using those experiences. So moving into oral. I mean, the power of sound's really important and often forgotten. I find that, especially in VR and stuff, everyone's been going for controllers and stuff like that, and AR as well. But it increases immersion, especially good 3D spatial sound. Improves navigation instead of having, so that elevator experience we're building, a lot of it is driven by sound, so you don't actually sort of get arrows or anything like that to actually navigate. It's more sound and light that we're using to actually get people to move in the space. And also in that elevator experience I showed, there's no teleportation because it's baby steps, so first stage. But definitely with the sound stuff is altering emotional states. We've got a qualified sound engineer as part of my team, and he's very passionate about the different ways and the types of sound and music we're actually going to put into our experiences. And it's also personalised, especially really good spatial sound can actually be different for different people. So this is an experience, if I can get it to get up just a sec. This is an experience I built for the HoloLens for the Australian Financial Review. We realised we were going to have CEOs and CFOs in the HoloLens, and they don't want to air tap. So they don't want to learn, and they also don't want to look stupid. So we wanted to make sure, how do I get a CEO or a CFO engaged with content? What do CEOs usually do? They usually yell at people. So if I can get them to yell at stuff and things will change, then they'll be pretty happy. So I'll just show these. Oops, now there's no sound. That's going to be... we got sound, just a sec. I did test this before.
Display price.
There we go.
Return home.
So all voice controlled. We wanted to make sure that, these guys had, it was on a trade show floor as well, so they had 2 minutes to play with this thing. So they had to be able to speak clearly. Funnily enough, it was using Microsoft's voice program, and our lead guy's from Dubbo and didn't understand his voice because he's got a pretty broad Australian accent. So he thought it was broken until we actually put an American twang onto it and found that it was the fact that it didn't understand Australian. But yeah, it's really, really powerful to be able to do that. We're looking at our next experiences we're building are around workplace bullying is one of the experiences we're building at the moment, and we're using AI, sophisticated AI with voice to get people to make sure they're using the right words when they're speaking to people, which is really quite, it hasn't been done before. And this is another area. The other part we really recognise is the relationship that people have with their teachers. If you're doing a blended experience with teachers where you're doing some time in the classroom, some time online, the online part is disconnected because you're not dealing with that teacher. So what we're looking at is actually voice simulation for our teachers, allowing them to record an amount of their audio and then driving an AI simulation. The goal for us is actually each teacher will have its own AI-driven bot that'll live in VR, and it'll guide students through experiences, and they'll be personalised to that specific teacher. But the teacher can then jump into that bot, and if it's a challenging question or a scenario that the AI doesn't actually understand. So we can actually get a teacher to feel like they can expand their knowledge much more broadly across students, but then also have a personal effect, and I can give you an example.
I am Joe's synthetic voice simulation, and I am excited to talk to you all at Unite 2018.
So that's my voice driven by AI. I never said any of those words. And that was about 300 sentences that I recorded using Lyrebird. And it was fairly simple. Just read sentences into my iPhone and basically came out with that voice. So you can see it's still a bit mechanical, a little bit rough. And it's probably not a bad thing because students will understand it's the AI they're talking to. It's not necessarily the real teacher. But it's got a timbre and a feeling that it is close. It gives that personal connection, and it's really important, I think. All right, so emotional. The interesting thing we've found with this is being a government organisation, being a education institute, we've obviously got a lot of responsibility, and having 500,000 students mean we have to deal with a lot of different people. So emotional for us is really important, and it's usually something that people don't really think too much about yet. We haven't worked out what the ethics and the impact are of VR and AR yet. Everyone thinks it's just like other gaming, but realistically, I mean, I've done about 500 hours of VR, and if I'm jumping in and doing I do a lot of design in VR, and if I do a big session of 4 hours or 5 hours, I dream for the next 3 nights in that space. So it's obviously giving an impact in my brain, and we don't even know what the effects are long term yet. But one of the areas we're looking into is avatars. So on the left is an ugly mug at the top, but that was scanned using iPhone X with a piece of software called Bellis 3D. We're still working out on what spectrum we want to do with our teacher avatars. How far do we want to take it? So the one next is Micah, which is Magic Leap's pretty amazing avatar. But I mean, that's a lot of processing power to get that thing at that level. We're probably a couple of years away before that's going to be scalable in any way. The other one, if you haven't seen that, is the Babylon VR experience for the guys at Kite and Lightning. That's actually real-time motion capture using an iPhone 10, facial motion capture. They're pretty amazing guys. They won the Tech Awards at SIGGRAPH this year for Immersive. And the last one, which is a pretty rudimentary experience at the moment, that's actually our managing director that we designed in a really stylized sort of basic cut-down version to see how far we could push it so it could still be recognisable. We're sort of looking at where on the spectrum we actually want to move so people feel comfortable, they don't get that uncanny valley issue. So it's probably going to be somewhere between the young kid and the last one, just for something that's actually scalable. And we'll probably initially start with a character creator type tool, but then eventually look at scanning people and having a reference. This is an interesting question. No one's been able to ask me, answer the question for me, especially my legal department. So we've got a big question. We haven't even decided whether or not we can kill a student yet in virtual reality. My legal team avoids the question, and none of the managers have been able to answer it for me. But it's a really important question to ask, you know. I mean, you can do anything in this space, really. And there's ethics and there's obviously good taste that come into it. But there's also the impact that we don't know we're doing to people. You can actually induce PTSD or CTSD through these experiences because they are so immersive. I mean, there's some really great stuff you can obviously generate. Things like awe and empathy are great. The image on the top is a homeless experience from Stanford, and it's a fantastic experience. But you can do things also like an explosion at a work site, which will induce these stress and fear issues. What we want to try and get to is curiosity. That's obviously the really important part, especially for us in education. But the other ones are equally important. We've just got to understand how much we can do. How stressed can I make a student in a particular experience? So I can show you one of my mistakes that I did at 3M. So this is our working at heights simulator that we did at 3M, and this is where you started. If you're scared of heights, it's pretty confronting. And the other thing we did to them and didn't tell them was the fact that they could fall off the building. So that's a pretty confronting experience to have for your first VR experience. Lessons learned, don't do that. I mean, the Plank's been a big popular VR game, and it's funny to make your friends scared in VR, but it's not really healthy, and it doesn't help with teaching. So for us, we will do a working heights experience, but they'll probably start at ground level and they'll elevator up so they know that they're going to get into a stressful environment and be consciously ready for it. And we probably won't have them hitting the ground. So equally important. The other area is cognitive overload. This is hyperreality. The guy who actually created this movie, it's been out for a couple of years now, he's now head of interaction or creative design at LeapMotion. But this is definitely what not to do. Absolutely inundating the consciousness is quite scary, and that it's spam for the eyes. I mean, the other challenge I have dealing with students is, if I put 20 students into a VR experience of 20 minutes, how do I then teach them after that when they're all jazzed up and they're all hyperactive? Because you feel like that. Even if you play a normal console game for a set amount of time, trying to go to sleep straight after that is almost impossible because your brain's ticking over quite a lot. So we've got to understand how much input we're giving to these people as they're doing things. And one of the things, this is from the local guys, Liminal, is we're looking into virtual cooldowns where you won't take the headset off after the experience finishes. You'll then sit there and start to emotionally cool down a bit and get your head around getting back into the real world. And we'll probably do things like bring the cameras in so you start seeing the real world slowly, and then slowly bring people back into reality. There's no science around this stuff yet because it's still super early. I'm dealing with a lot of the universities. We're speaking to Stanford. We're speaking to all all the major universities in Australia, and we want to try and look at more research around this. But it's definitely for us, we've got a test bed of 500,000 students, but we don't want to sort of induce anything too crazy in them straight away. So looking at the further design considerations, constraints, and I'm happy to share this stuff with you guys, but this is work that we did with a UX company called We Discover. Like just listing out everything we have to take into account when we're actually designing this type of stuff, things like graphic constraints, physical like we've got a learning designer who's in a wheelchair, and it's really quite interesting. There's a whole bunch of stuff you don't even think about. Like if he's got 2 controllers in his hand, how does he turn his wheelchair? So we've got to start building stuff for people who don't necessarily have that ability. And then things around, and I mean, it's areas that the headset manufacturers avoid, but things around privacy. If you've got Facebook building Oculus headsets, how much of that data is being tracked and where is it going? And that's another question we have to ask, obviously, as a government organisation. Things like scale and space. So realism versus familiarity is a big thing, and grounding, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around, obviously, depth of field and angular dimensioning for text. If people haven't seen the Google thing around text, good text in VR, it's a really good tool to use. As I said, standardising's really good for us. Affordances are super important. Left hand versus right hand is another thing that a lot of people forget about in VR. Navigation, health and safety. So I back a neck strain. I don't tend to use VR headsets in conferences unless people have wiped down the headset with really good disinfectant, or they have eye masks. So if you've never had an eye infection, come and talk to me, it's terrible. But yeah, and I got that from a developer's headset. So, I don't trust headsets anymore unless they're cleaned up. And that's a big thing, especially if I'm rolling this out to, as I said, a bunch of students. I've got to make sure that it's safe for them to use all the time. And then the audio and emotional stuff that I touched on. So that stuff's really important to make sure you've got that checklist. We've got that printed out in our office. So we are ticking those boxes whenever we're building stuff. In conclusion, start now. Start thinking about the broader stuff. Don't just think about the game mechanics. Don't just think about the fun part you're trying to do. Start thinking about the other stuff that you are potentially doing. Anticipate changes. I mean, I think the Quest is going to be really interesting to see how that changes things. Again, I think my 3 DOF obsession is going to go away pretty quickly because it won't be needed, which is probably a good thing because obviously for immersion, 6 DOF's where it should be. The experiences should evolve, and most game developers know that, you're always doing updates, but for the non-gaming stuff, a lot of people build the thing and they've paid the developers or whoever did it for them, and they think it's finished. It can't be, you'll find that the first thing you ship is terrible and the people don't know how to use it, so you have to make sure you've got the budget to be able to improve it. Don't keep mistakes. We've probably developed about 9 or 10 experiences at the lab since March, and we'll probably throw away 80% of them. Because they're not right, and you can't get too personal with this stuff. And the last thing's experiment. I mean, speak to your bosses, speak to your managers or whoever, and say, we can't just keep building stuff. We've got to make sure we know what's coming next. We've got to make sure where we can go with this stuff, because it's really important to have that focus. So this is just a short showreel of what we've done since March.
Here we go. I'll declare the TAFE New South Wales Digital Lab officially open.
Thanks.